to be analyzed, scrutinized, sanitized. Probably all sorts of other words that I'm not even going to strain your brain to think about. So let's see what they were. Speaking of the news, here's one that somebody asked that I believe that we, somewhere along the line the last few months, made some small mention of this, but it is very, what's the word that rhymes with subtle? Not orange. Well, this is quite subtle. The news item said, being a teacher, preacher, or a reporter is like the supreme form of acceptable, in fact, oftentimes praiseworthy, plagiarism. Several times the subject has come up. The examples that I believe that we were using recently had to do with like holy books and scriptures and how important that is to the intellectual life of man. And once you can see that and not stop at the specific, that is, we're talking about food, not a critique of some restaurant, so that you don't get strangled like, well, which religion, which holy book? Or, yeah, there's a difference between holy books and cookbooks. If you say so. All right, once you understand that, then it's no longer just books, it's talk. But books are like a solid form of somebody else talking that you can carry around, that you don't have to in case you don't like having strangers in your house all the time, or somewhat of a recluse. Perhaps you're not all that popular with other people yourself. But rather than have to worry about people coming over and talking to you, or having to buy a TV set or pay for cable and have that, a book is like you can go and open it up and it's like somebody tells you something. And plus it's pretty serious in the book to most civilized people, or else it wouldn't be in a book that somebody thought was serious enough to publish the damn thing. So it doesn't have to be just a holy book. But the thing is, since we've been talking along the lines, these news items about people cannot think for themselves in a way that obviously we can't describe, certainly can't defend, certainly can't prove, because everyone will say, I can think for myself, and they got you. You might as well pack up and go home. Just remind me of the latest. What do you call a drummer whose girlfriend's mad at him? A homeless person. I couldn't resist. All right. We're getting, what I was trying to do is get more subtle from where we were. If you got a book, then you don't need a brain in a sense. If you've got a book, you do not need to think. If you have the history of man, you do not have to think. Now, ordinary people say they do. In fact, you can major in history, I've heard, and waive a diploma. And waive a diploma and say, not only can I think based on history, I can think so well that I'm an expert in history. And waive that diploma. Do you understand, in a sense, you have taught it is the invisible, civilized, and it would appear to be symbolic, if not metaphorical, to ordinary people, but it is like a genetic line hormonally, but now it's been transferred into the neural line that a man says, he begins quoting the Bible, Socrates, Hindu scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Kant. And it appears as though something is taking place. At the civilized level, obviously it would appear that you are in the presence of at least a literate person, because he's not quoting Merle Haggard. In case you think there is a definitive quantitative difference between Merle Haggard and Chaucer or Goethe. That man couldn't play a guitar worth a damn, by the way. Any of you who are still impressed by him, I heard him play before he died. There is the reason that this news item, I think, was brought tonight, besides being a teacher, preacher, rabbi, public speaker, there is a glint to people's eye. I'll start it crudely, because they can't help it. It's not that they are willfully or even accidentally deranged, but there is a kind of glint. It is a kind of spark of energy running through this invisible neural genetic line that when someone is publicly and apparently deserving of an audience or have an audience, and they're speaking and they open their mouth and other people's words come out, there is a certain gleam. There is a certain apparent self-assurance. There is a certain kind of conviction that it's like, well, hey, you're not dealing with Mickey Mouse here. I'm not just here talking. Listen to me. I'm quoting Buddha. Or whoever impresses you. I'm quoting, of course, the ultimate is always, if you'll go for it, hey, don't laugh at me, don't look at me, folks. This is what God said right there. And if you're, dancing to that tune, they got you. What can you say? You showed up at a place that, the God place. We're going to, lectures on God. And you show up, and it sounds all right, and then they get into areas that you don't care for, and that's when the minister or rabbi begins to respond. They used to call that in the South, by the way, it's like, the amen corner, or where the sisters would sit down in front and giving it a good ear, and the preacher's taking off on drinking and et cetera, and they're going, yes, yes, yes. And then he says something about dipping snuff and chewing tobacco, and all of them are kind of, one of them punches no one says, he done gone from preaching to meddling. At any rate, it will eventually, all you got to do is talk a few minutes, and it will eventually offend somebody, but you understand the ultimate defense is for the man to go, wait a minute, I see those looks on your face. I didn't say that. I didn't condemn you for doing that. God did. That would seem to be the ultimate. But again, why I think this news item was brought up, circa 1993, there is a kind of refined, more civilized version of that. And it specifically nowadays has to do with news reporting. That since I've got enough of you to kind of laugh along, and you can, I assume that you caught what I was pointing out when I was talking about gleams in eyes and that kind of conviction that a priest or someone who says they're speaking for the gods, if you're part of that kind of dance and that part of the game, which the majority of civilization is part-time, one way or the other, all civilized people will claim to be, if not downright religious, at least moralistically, humanistic enough that they do not find the basic moral tenets of religion to be offensive, even if they're not active followers themselves. But anyway, so all of you would kind of laugh along that there is like this ultimate defense of oneself and this gleam that, hey, this is not just me talking. This is God talking. I'm just quoting him. I'm just telling you. Even if you seem to be a little bit past that, or if you think, well, that does not affect me that strongly anymore, you're still the type of person, if you're sane and civilized now, who very likely, very, very likely have at least in part replaced what would have been perhaps your father's or grandfather's interest in religion now with more of an up-to-date intellectual interest in world affairs. In the full gamut, whether it be specifically in matters of ecology, political matters, the economic paradigms that seem to be subtly shifting as Eastern Europe continues to crumble, and the nations that be and the nations that would be now try to realign themselves into new models and etc. In other words, the what? The news. There is now, and it's not of course presented in the same way because it flashes on the news shows now. Let's take television, the most, of all polling results, the most common and used form that humans use to get their news. You do not have wild-eyed people screaming and ranting. They're people dressed up. They're sitting on nice sets. They seem to be literate. They're obviously, have had their hair professionally done. They've taken elocution lessons. It's all written. They do not ad lib like some shows I could name. these guys may be looking at the camera, but the Rathers and the Jennings and whoever it all, they do not ad lib, my friends. Just because they're not picking up papers and reading like some crude shows, shoddy shows that, well, I assume you know, but they have little things that they're sitting there reading at the camera to where they look like they're looking at you and just talking and reporting the news. All right, there's a more subtle, what I'm getting at, and it's not obviously an attack on the news, unless we're committing suicide here, but there is now a kind of new, sort of more sophisticated refinement of that kind of mad gleam, that kind of ultimate self-defense, wherein a man does not have to think. No, I don't have to think. I'm a preacher. What the hell do you want? I don't have to think. God thinks for me. And you can go, well, hey, I'm beyond that. Get away from me with that. Turn off that channel. I don't see those kind of mad TV preachers. Turn on the news. Oh. And then you don't have that ranting and raving. You have a man sitting at a desk and saying, and now the latest from Bosnia, where the president of the breakaway areas in the erstwhile Muslim sections, and he begins to talk, and if you can hear it, because you turned it on, we're back to this. You've got some interest in it, so it's hard to hear somebody pointing out something because you're assuming there's some opinion in there, because if you're interested in it, you got one. You remember that only a few days ago. You don't listen to them talking about food as if they could. You're listening out for a specific critique of a restaurant. So they begin to talk. I know that I kind of muddied it up while in an attempt to clear it up, but we'll press on right quick. See, if you're ordinary and you turn it on, you have some interest in the news, and so you don't really pay that much attention to the presentation. But there is that same kind of dynamic at work in this news item, that nowadays you can report the news, and if you can see it in a certain way, there is those who do it, not just at a national level, but local level, those that are aspiring to it. You can see a certain kind of real, at that level, satisfaction. More than just having a job, and more than just making more than a bricklayer. There is a kind of, it's almost as though they made the news. That they're not just reporting the news, it's that I am now part of the news. It's almost as though, I told you it was subtle. That was my way out. You understand? It is the same thing, but more refined than a man saying, it's good you came here, because I'm not just some fly-by-night preacher. I have a message from God. When you hear me speak, you hear God speak. Now, if you'll bind that kind of story, well, let's go ahead and admit, that's heavy duty. I mean, if you believe that, if you're interested in that kind of thing and you go somewhere and a guy looks you dead in the audience and says, I am not just here spewing out some kind of doctrine from some organized religion. I represent no one but God. I'm going to tell you what God told me. I mean, whatever you paid to get in, you got your money's worth. Right? The refinement of reporters now, it's not that I'm just here to report the news. The unsaid part is, I am the news. That's not exactly it, but there is no way to put it. I am as important as the news. The reason I brought the comparison, it is the same thing as saying, what you're about to hear is not simply my voice and my opinion. I am speaking for God. Except now they're saying, I am speaking for the news. And it sounds, in a way, more up to date because a man's saying also, I mean, he didn't bother to say it. It's obvious at that level. The report is also non-verbally stating what you're about to hear, I didn't make up. This actually happened, which is just a variation of what I'm about to say is not my chintzy opinion. What I'm about to tell you folks, I'm not about to tell you don't go home and drink and smoke your pipes and all that, and snuff. I'm not telling you that, no. I'm telling you what God said. the news. What I'm about to tell you, as shocking as it may be, when you hear what happened today in Sri Lanka, we thought things, when you hear this, you will be shocked, but I did not make it up. God made it up. And God selected me to tell you about it. You understand? Because that's what the news is now. The news is without any analyzation being necessary. Since no analyzation is necessary for ordinary minds anyway, but I thought I'd go ahead and point it out. They don't have to say it, but the unsaid part, you do hear me, the unsaid part is, and it's serious. Because if it was otherwise, it would wreck everything. The unsaid part of the news is, when they say, they play the little theme music, and here it is, your local or network reporter. Now remember, keep in mind what used to be, and it's still in certain other time areas on this planet, of a man somewhere right now saying, you're about to hear something important. Not because I said it, but because God said it. The variation. Man in a more calm, controlled manner. And the unsaid part he's saying is, and now the news. And what he's saying is, and this is not something I made up. This happened, which is just a variation of God said it, which is just a variation of, hey, I'm much more important than I appear. And one version is, and the first one is, I'm much more important than I appear. Obviously much more so than you people who came to hear me, because God talks to me. He doesn't talk to you, or you wouldn't be here. Ha-ha. Everybody thinks, yeah, true. Lay it on us then. You turn on the news, why? I know it sounds a little different, but it's not. You turn on the news, why? Because you don't know what happened today. You're interested, and you got to turn on the news. And don't stop and be crude and go, well, I couldn't know. I had to work. I didn't know what was going on there. He has access to all the news items. Come in, he knows. NBC, all the networks, CNN, they know. They got stringers out there. They got reporters. They know what happened. Sure, I got to turn on the news. I don't know what happened in Sri Lanka today. I don't know what's going on with the Russian parliament. I had to turn it on. I don't know. You missed the point. That's just a variation. God told me. And if you're ordinary, you can say, oh, no, it's not. Because this actually happened. They actually got reporters over in other parts of the world, and they send the reports over there before the news comes on, and that's how the reporters go. And now the latest from the recent unpleasantness going on in India. And if you're ordinary, you'd say, well, certainly I got to turn on the news. I can't run over to India every day. I can't go over there, and even if I did, I don't know where to look. And so I got to turn on the news. It's the same thing as the man saying, all right, it's a good thing you came here, because I'm going to tell you what God wants you to do. Oh, And you're saying the same thing. Well, I had to come see this guy because God didn't tell me. I don't have somebody in heaven. I don't have somebody in, wherever God lives in your particular view. I don't have anybody over there. He won't talk to me. So, yeah, I got to turn on the news. I got to go see a rabbi, a priest, a minister, and somebody give me the news. Being able to quote others in the full sense of the term is like the most pleasant way possible to survive not having to think for yourself. People now, and all of you do know, it's not an attack on the news media any more than it is religion. It's just not. But it is something that is now right before your face, and it is a variation of what's been going on for thousands of years, and it's just a new refinement. Being able to quote somebody else, and this goes all the way from ministers and priests and reporters down to two people talking. As long as you've got somebody else to quote, but as long as it seems to be to your audience, such as reporters, that your audience accepts it. That what you're saying, you didn't think of it. Of course, I know we're back to this right quick if you want it. The reporter could say, wait a minute, certainly I didn't think of it. I'm just reporting the news. But if you look, they enjoy it much more than several $1 million a year salary, or whatever they make, would support. That's not why they're there. There is a gleam. There's a tone of voice. And it's true with reporters, priests, rabbis, and ordinary people. Because you're playing reporter, you're playing priest at the same level. The old examples I pull out that go and continue there. You stand at a cocktail party, being your swab and denabbing yourself. And the conversation falls into, what's going to happen? Are the Balkan regions going to re-Balkanize themselves again? Or we got to go through this crap again? And you're really denabbering it up. And the little conversation there lulls for a second. And you sip your drink and you go, well, I couldn't help but hear what you're saying. And what strikes me, though, what strikes me is the irony now of them worrying over the area, the erstwhile area known as Macedonia, which after World War II was again called Macedonia, being part of, split up between Greece and Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. But now they're back trying to raise the banner of Macedonia and scaring the bejesus out of the Greeks. Do we have to go through this? It's not an attack on egoism, and it's not an attack, which I can point out that obviously you got to know that the man doing that, he doesn't know that. He read it. He heard it on the news tonight. But he did it, and you've done it yourself. And your brain goes, am I something or what? And at the ordinary level, of course, there is certainly nothing wrong with that any more than there's anything wrong with what preachers do and reporters do. It is just the flow of things. And the people staying there with you might be going, it's quite interesting, which is the same thing as a priest having an audience. The same thing as a reporter, knowing by the demographics that there is an audience. I'm the second most popular reporter in this time slot in the country. You go through this whole thing that you just read, because it's obvious. If you stopped the guy at the party and you said, where the hell, what do you know about this Macedonia? Have you been to Greece lately? Were you even alive at the end of World War II when they split up the area and drew out those new boundaries? And it turns out the guy, 25 years old. What's World War II? What? What do you mean world? He'd never even heard of it. The whole point being, in a sense, all of this is just puffery. It's just plagiarism. He just heard it today. He has no idea what it is. He's just trying to show off. Well, that's a cheap shot. Everybody alive is trying to show the hell off. Anybody that's talking is trying to show off. And anybody that's talking who don't think for themselves, who cannot think for themselves, are, may I dare say it, a friggin' plagiarist, no matter who you are. And so that's what you're left with. That's why some people hesitate to talk. That's why some people seem shy. But that's why most people try not to be shy. Because you're going to get through life and you know in a non-essential sense, everyone knows that they got an idea what thinking is. They know they got a brain. They know that thing runs all the time. But they also, there's another item we didn't get to, that initially everybody smells a rat. But they get over it. Everybody smells, you smell a rat. An ordinary person would smell a rat if I did all that little scene about a guy saying at the cocktail party and listen to him discuss what's going on. And he goes, well, blah, 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 and he does that. Even the people, if I jumped in or if you jumped in and said, hey, that guy, does anybody know this guy? And they say, well, yeah, he's a junior exec in our office down there, but, well, what's it? Did he major in political science? No. And everybody, if you said, well, that man doesn't know what he's talking about, everybody kind of goes, well, yeah. But hell, you knew that when you were a kid. You knew that when your parent says, honesty is the best policy. That is, when you stole something that you wanted, when you grabbed food from your little sister or something, they went, no, honesty is the best policy. Everybody initially smelled a rat. And if that didn't make you smell a rat, as soon as you said, why? And whatever answer they gave you, that's when you really smelled a rat. When they said, well, because God don't want you to. And you thought, where the hell's God? And I know you'll smack me, but what do you mean that they don't want me to? Everybody smelled a rat like, wait a minute, something's closing in on me, and I don't know what it is. And the people that tell me it's closing in, they don't know what it is, and they keep going, well, I'll tell you what's happening. And they start talking about Bosnia and Sri Lanka and God, and you smelled a rat. But then pretty soon it did close in on you. You can't imagine you smell a rat, not in those conditions, because then it turns out your parents are the source of the odor. Your whole community, life, so you can't do it. But being a plagiarist, not being able to think for yourself, if you talk, you're a plagiarist. It's that simple. That was another news item, if I'm quoting it correctly, that if you do not think for yourself and you talk, then no matter how you cut it, no matter how you explain it, you can call it anything you want to, but if you do not think for yourself and you talk, it's simple. You're a plagiarist. That's it. But between you and whoever you're dancing with, whether it be one other person while you're staying at a cocktail party, or whether you had some forum to stand up and say, well, I'm glad you people showed up. I am a blank. I am in charge of speaking tonight. I am a priest, a minister, the lecturer. I am a reporter. The whole thing is, there's a kind of satisfaction because it seems to be a more professional level of plagiarism. And especially now the news. Because you could jump up. Surely all of you get the connection, but if you are not religiously inclined and suddenly you find yourself in some kind of religious meeting and somebody hollering about, here's what God wants, and it gets more and more, to you kind of outlandish, you can snap and go, you don't know what the hell God wants. Where are you from? You could, go back to smelling a rat. Some way you lapse back to childhood and you're not supposed to. Where are you from? And of course you can figure there it is, he's in a tent somewhere out in a rural area in Mississippi. Not the same people that was flying saucers. This guy's a minister. You don't have to ask, where's your diploma? Did you graduate from Harvard or Yale or Princeton? You know he's got no credentials. And so you could pick on the man. But nobody jumps up and hollers when somebody says, and now, the news. Nobody jumps up and says, what do you mean the news? Who are you? Because now it seems even safer. What do you mean, who am I, sir? Well, I just got through. I've been, all my life, I've been around phonies, people standing up, speaking in stern, authoritative voices. And I just got through showing up. Last week, I was in Mississippi. I hate to do it, but I've had enough of this stuff in life, and I had to stand up and call that man's hand. He was in there waving Bibles and stuff and hunting about what God wants, had all people all worked up and sweating bullets. And I said, who are you to talk? What's your credentials? Where did you get this information? Boy, I showed him. And so the reporter says, and? Well, I think it's time I moved uptown. Here I am, and you're trying to pull that same crap. The reporter and the audience would think, this guy is a nut. Because it's obvious. The reporter can say, how can you say it's the same thing? I agree with you. I'm sophisticated. I'm of your generation. I'm of your, I think, probably same social level. And I agree. I know the kind of people you're talking about. And I don't blame you for getting up and being upset. But I'm not a minister. Why are you trying to compare me? I'm here reporting the news. Same thing. No, somebody show the man out, right? Well, we should hope so. It's the same thing. Because if you do not think for yourself, which no one does, present company excluded, if you do not think for yourself, it's quite simple. Number one, and you talk, number two. Then number three, you are a plagiarist. Plain and simple. You can be a plagiarist in a tent, stealing from God, stealing from, in our case, certain Anglo-Saxon decisions made at one time as to, well, what are we going to include in that book? You're either doing that or you're stealing from the news. Yes, but the news actually happened. I know. And if you're just an ordinary person just talking, you can say, well, I'm not stealing from anybody. One, if you do not think for yourself, which no one does, present company excluded, and two, you talk, then three, you're a plagiarist. Point of order, please. Where the hell did you ever hear point of order? Well, I read it in what do you call it, Browning's Guide to Bullets? Robert's Rules of Order, which was kind of a sissy version. Those of you who don't know it, the original one was Browning's Book of Bullets, because this was, I'll admit this was in the late 1600s, there was a man named Browning, every time they'd have a meeting. It was over in what is now, it's part of, anyways, now part of what is Hungary, that whenever they'd have a meeting and people would not do right, when he was in charge, like they'd speak out of turn or say, we disagree, he would have them shot. And then it kind of got to be a sissy version that whoever it was this Robert started this rules of order that if you disrupted his meetings, I think he was probably English, is then they would have somebody wave this book and say, here, sir, you can't do that because it says you can't on page 17, rule number 16. we're apparently out of time. We're certainly not out of news. Is that it? Over? Done for. 1 minute. It's either that or a rude gesture coming from the control room. All right. Is there really 1 minute left? All right. One item that I was really trying to get to, and that was the opening news item tonight, was only the old die young. The old. Hormones get old, neurons get old, but only the old die young. Only those who have naturally died intellectually do so young. Or as they like to say on the news, an untimely death. Or he or she died before his time, which, of course, you can't go into like, wait a minute. 29-year-old famous budding author accidentally falls from the top of a penthouse at a party, and they say, died before his time, and you can't go, wait a minute, when was he scheduled to die? But it's not just to make fun of that. They think it means something, and what it means is this. They just don't know it. The only way you can die before your time is to be subject to this. Only the old die young. The other one doesn't really count. Or it counts a lot if you want to. The point is, nothing you can do about it. But dying before your time, what they're actually getting at and don't know it. An untimely death is, well, look at that. The poor man lived to be 70, and he quit thinking at the age of 7, like the rest of us. And it makes everybody kind of get the willies, and they go, ooh. And so then, as life is so pleasantly arranged, you just automatically turn your attention to the physical side. Oh, don't he look nice? When you look in the coffin, you think, don't he look nice since he lost 50 pounds just before he died? You know? But they think, how untimely. His mother lived to be 90. If he'd just held on a few more years. It's anything rather than face the fact that I used to smell a rat. And it was like I got distracted. And I began quoting other people. I realized, shit, I don't have to think for myself. I understand. Okay. Well, if that's the way you feel, one to you too, sir.